So I was talking to somebody earlier on today about angles, direction, and distance, and how this plays into some of the stuff that's used in NLP. Now, a classic aspect of NLP is shifting around the mental representations. So we can take something that's big and close and not very nice, and we can make it smaller and further away. And then it basically reduces its impact. Now, this isn't something I particularly like to do with people. It's something I will have in mind as a possibility to use. But my main issue with those sort of techniques is they're largely creating little more than denial. It's okay, so something's in your mind and you don't want it there. Well, make it go away and it's gone. Now, there's plenty of things that actually getting rid of, having denial for, is absolutely fine. But there's a lot of people who their natural inclination to get through life is stuff it down, ignore the feelings, lie to oneself, deny the truth of experience. And I wonder just how much of NLP work actually can facilitate that when it's misapplied or it's applied without really understanding what it is we're doing with what we're doing. So, one of the questions I used to ask NLPers when I was in practice groups and various other places, when you do a double dissociation for a phobia, why are you having the representation in front of them? What's the logic behind that? Why, when you have them dissociate and lift up out of their body and go back to the projection room, why are we doing it in that angle? And also, what's the distance involved here? Is there any calibration or measurement of actually how far back the projection room might be? And is that relevant? Is it important? And how far away is the screen in the first instance that they're looking at? And these are quite important details. Why have we not got a person floating up out of their body and going to the right? And so now the screen, they're looking at themselves, looking at the screen, and now we have an angle as we look to self, an angle as they look to screen. Why not that one? Now, you don't have a projector room off to one side in a cinema. But I'm sure it's possible to create a story where that would be possible under modern technology. Not everyone's actually familiar now with the old cinemas where you got the man turning the handle on the projector. I certainly remember actually as a child, sometimes movies were long enough that actually they had to stop halfway through and change the reels. And in Southend, at the beginning, when everyone's sitting down, there was a man in an orchestra pit conducting music facing the curtain, which I never quite understood. But anyway, so technology is changing. But my point being, what is the rationale for having it in front? And has anyone considered what that rationale actually is and what its function is by having it there? What would happen actually if we had it behind them? What impact would that have? Would that be a better result now it's in their past? Or would it be a worse result because they're no longer seeing themselves in that way, and essentially for a phobia cure we need the person to have a good look at themselves? So these are some of the considerations to have. Other stuff, when we make something smaller and further away, and people say, push it off into the distance. Well, I don't know why you'd push, because that implies some kind of resistance. I would have it slide it off into the distance. But which distance? In front, to off to one side angle, sideways, behind, where are they sliding it to? And again, what is the impact of the different directions, the different angles? Is it going at a level with the person? Or are we making it go off into the distance and down? Over the horizon is quite a good one. Or up. And again, that angle, what's that got to do with anything? And what are the qualitative differences with that? So, the other aspect is when we dissociate people from an associated representation that's not very healthy for them. What are the angles and distances involved? And how can that be improved to be made better? Now, I've got a little story or a client example of something I did years ago. And this was when I lived in a tiny little unheated bedsit. 9 of us lived in the property, and it was basically a converted old house that the landlord never maintained. One dribble shower between 9 of us, no hot water, and no heating. It was just, it's the only thing I could afford. God-awful place. But I was there for a couple of years because I quite like the people I live with, amazingly. Somebody came to see me from my little tiny terrible room that I had, and that's essentially the only space I had to work from. And because I was in the city centre, I I got a lot of people from the university, a lot of people from the hospital, to massive bodies of population. So I regularly put my posters and leaflets around the hospital where I was working, but also around the university. And Southampton University was huge. It is huge. And so I used to get a steady stream of people. Now, a young student came to see me. She was having trouble concentrating and had exams coming up and wasn't really able to focus. I've got to be honest, I had no idea what to do with her, simply because exams, not my forte. Focusing on stuff for periods of time, definitely not my forte. So I did what I could. I was doing basic sort of NLP stuff. I forget what I was trying to do. I was doing classic Ericksonian hypnosis with suggestion. And towards the end of the hour, when the session ended, and I thought this is actually a bit of a waste of time, to be honest, and I got the impression she thought the same. As she got up to go, she said to me, "Would this sort of thing help me with bereavement?" And I thought, aha. Something I remember from my days of working in hospitals was they always used to say, listen to the last thing the patient says just before they go out the door. GPs especially know this one, because often what they've done is they've come with another story that's the test story to find out whether this person, they like the person they're talking to. And then as they go, they might just off the cuff mention the real issue as to why they asked for the appointment. And I did wonder, okay, now I get what's going on here. She can't concentrate. Okay, get that. Okay, tell me more about the bereavement. Well, a while before, and it may have been a year or so, her father had died. And she then told me the story of essentially what happened. So father had become suddenly unwell. He was in hospital. He'd had a number of surgeries, and then he subsequently died in hospital. Now, she spent every day at the bedside. I think she was very close to her father. I don't think there was other members of the family. Every day at the bedside, and is just watching him slowly expire as more procedures and invasive procedures were being performed on him. And then she told me the thing that actually happened. She was fixated on watching the wound drains. Now, if you ever had major surgery or seen major surgery, you'll be familiar with what I mean here. But to describe to anyone else, essentially, after major surgery, you have to drain away the excess fluid or blood that can collect in the wound. Otherwise, you have a big sack of liquid sloshing around that then goes septic. So a wound drain is a tube that goes into the wound. It's stitched in place. It's got little perforations on it, and then it collects in a device. And there's lots of different types of devices in which it collects, which essentially often looks like a demijohn, big bottle, which then it drips into. And there's variations on the theme there. Now, someone had commented to her, if that bottle filled up too much, then he's internally bleeding, and he'd have to have even more surgery, which clearly was not going to be a good sign. Now, that's the thing that she'd latched onto, and she's sitting at the bedside every day, staring at this bottle, counting the drops that drip into it. And she's clearly highly stressed, highly distressed by the situation. She then gets up to go to the bathroom, and because she's so tired, she's not sleeping properly, blah, blah, blah. She spends quite a long time in the bathroom. Then when she went back to his room, he died. And that she'd blamed herself for not being there when he died, and potentially could she have kept her eye on that wound bottle and somehow alerted the nurses that something was wrong? Because that's not how things work, but that was the thing she got. So now what I've got to do is, okay, what am I going to do with that scene? Because that's a highly charged scene for her. It's very, very personal. There's no real good spin that can be put on that. I know only too well that the reassurance frame, oh, it wasn't your fault, all that kind of stuff, that's not going to help. So I need to do something else there. Now, I've already done about an hour of hypnosis with her. She's a reasonably good trance subject, so this should be quite easy, especially as the imagery is very powerful for her. So, in we go, under, close eyes, blah, 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 blah. Now I get her to relive the scene. I get her to relive the scene where she's in the room, sitting on the uncomfy plastic chair in an overheated room, watching father slowly drain away into this bottle. And she gets quite distressed with that. And then I bring her out of that. Just wanted to check she could do it. Bring her out of that and just put her back in again. Nice little trance. And then I say, now this time I want you to sit in the chair. Are there any other chairs in the room? And there were two other chairs in the room. I said, fine, because I want you to sit watching your father and watching that bottle. But I want your father, as he is today, to be sat by your side. Now, at that moment, absolute breakdown in terms of emotional release. And I can't do that. I said, okay, I'm going to repeat it again. Your father as he is today. Now, what does that even mean? Your father as he is today died a year ago. Well, people have some sense of continuity in some weird kind of way. They have a notion of how their deceased relative is. They sometimes have conversations with them. It might be historical conversations, they're remembering them, or they have this sense they're watching over them, all that kind of stuff. Because what became very clear to me was she had the feeling that he would have blamed her. And would he really? Probably not. Anyway, so she now watches the whole scene again, and this time she has father sat by her, and she's sobbing now. She's actually sobbing all the way through. And then I get her to open her eyes and then end the session. So I didn't decide which side he is to sit. For me, there's lots of biblical connotation, sitting on the right-hand side, sitting on the left-hand side, that kind of stuff. It's a thing within those who are familiar with biblical or scripture stuff. There's lots of stuff there. I left that to her to decide. I did not dissociate her from the representation. I kept her within the representation. What I did was I introduced something from another representation into the imagery. Now, whilst it appears to anyone viewing that whole exchange between myself and her that she's greatly distressed, actually, this is probably the first time she's connected to the feelings she's been suppressing. And it's the first time that she's actually expressed those emotions and feelings. Now, I sent her away. She looked pretty awful, I have to say, as she went. I thought, I'm pretty confident with this one. And I got a phone call from her boyfriend later on. I can't remember now if it was later on that day or if it was the following day, basically to say what an astonishing change and how much better she had been and actually slept really well that night. Which doesn't surprise me, because essentially what I've done is create a set of images that now allows her to have a different perspective. She has father in dying state in front of her, which she's looping around again and again and again. Introduced future pace from that time perspective of how father is today. So it's a weird kind of juxtaposition of she's reliving a past event into the present. I now put something from the present into the past event. And so it kind of changes the time frames as well. And that was pretty much it. It's not something I can't think I've done the same sort of thing with anybody else that springs to mind. But certainly if I had a similar situation, I would probably try something similar to that again. As always, if you have any questions, observations, or comments on this, stick it in the comment section, and I'd be really grateful if you click the like button. Thank you very much.